In other news, we went to the auction.
We did.
And we won some stuff.
Yes.
You won the big stuff. I won the small stuff. I contained myself. So this is the CTE.
Yeah, central timing equipment.
All right. So that's the clock. But you got a big morsel.
I did. So this is the coupling data unit, which is a box that is. Oh, if I can get it out. This is a box that is just about as famous as the Apollo guidance computer, although most people don't know it by name.
Hello and welcome back. If you follow the channel, you know that we spent many episodes restoring an Apollo guidance computer back to full functionality and even flew lunar landings with it. That restored unit was sold at Sotheby's auction for an eye-watering $746,000, which made its owner very happy. Yes, auction is how NASA originally got rid of the surplus Apollo hardware we are working on, with most of it simply being melted for precious metals by recyclers. But for the stuff that escaped that dreadful fate, auction is still how it mostly changes hands today. In this particular one, Mike had his eyes on a rare Block 2 CDU, or coupling data unit. Now, the CDU is a pretty obscure box compared to the guidance computer it was connected to, but Mike had been looking for one for a long time for a very important project of his. It was not exactly the one he wanted. He was looking for a Block 2 LEM CDU, and this was a command module CDU. But close enough, he could still do his project with it. You can't be that picky when this stuff shows up, and better save up some serious dough.
This is the box that freaked out during the Apollo 11 landing and flooded the computer.
Well, this is where the 1202 happened.
Yeah.
Started to happen.
Yep.
And that's something we wanted to do for a long time.
Yes.
Replicate that with electronics, but then we found a real one were for sale.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like you got more than you bargained for.
Yeah. So the part tag on here, it says Apollo GNN system coupling data unit assembly command module. And that's important because the coupling data unit, unlike the AGC, is different between the command module and the lunar module.
Yeah, so what we should say first, that this is the D2A converter.
Yeah, this big 40-pound box is a 5-channel ADC and 5-channel DAC. The command module unit interfaces with the optics, so it has the shaft and trunnion for star sightings. And that, we can talk more about this in more detail later, but the major difference there is that it only uses a 16-speed resolver instead of both 1-speed and 16-speed.
Okay, Mike, hold your horses. Explaining that last statement will require a bout of elevator music. Yes, this big box is a giant A to D and D to A, but it's way more complicated than you might think. It's specifically made to digitally read or drive resolver angles to high precision. There are 5 very important angles that a computer needs to know about. The first 3 are sort of obvious, the 3 angles of the inertial platform, so the computer knows the attitude of the spacecraft. You sure want to fire your engines in the right direction. The 2 others depend on which spacecraft you're in. If you are in the command module, the 2 extra channels are dedicated to the star sighting optics, the sextant and the scanning telescope. These are used to realign the inertial platform to star sightings, something the astronauts did before every critical maneuver. In the command module, the computer assisted greatly in this operation by pointing the telescope and the sextant to where it thought the alignment star ought to be, so that the astronaut just had to recenter it to correct the alignment. But in the LEM, the optics are simpler, consisting of a single manually operated telescope. Instead, the precious 2 extra channels are dedicated to something more critical, the rendezvous radar used to navigate back to the command module. The rendezvous radar is mounted in the front of the LEM on a gyro-stabilized 2-axis gimbal. It needs to be first pointed roughly at the command module, then when it locks onto it, its precise position needs to be read, 2 things that the computer could do thanks to the 2 extra channels in the CDU. To make things more complicated, angles were measured by a sensor called a resolver. It's sort of an AC motor in reverse. You excite a rotor with a reference AC current, and two windings at 90 degrees of each other pick up an induced current proportional to the sine and the cosine of their position. These sensors are extremely rugged, precise, and offer completely glitch-free continuous rotation. They cost a bundle, and they are still used today in aircrafts and industrial applications such as CNCs. So I happen to have a resolver. This one's made by Harrowy, got it on eBay. So it looks like a little motor, except it has 6 wires coming out, 2 for the excitation and 2 each for the sine and the cosine windings. So I hooked it up to my HP generator, and that's the excitation, and that's what I get out of the 2 coils. And you see that one is the sine, one is the cosine. One is the maximum, the other one is the minimum. And it's more fun to look at it when I do an XY. Let's see if we can get that going. And since one is a sine and one is a cosine, it makes a line that rotates in a circle, which is of course a lot of fun, particularly when you start to go fast. Woohoo! So that's a resolver for you, and that's a very nice way to measure position. And if you put more windings than 2, you can have high resolution ones. So in the Apollo IMU, there was on each axis a ×1 and a ×64. So there was one that had 64 poles, so it rotates 64 times as fast. So for one turn you get 64 turns of the signals, and that's what allowed them to get the 20 arc-second precision that they wanted. Well, I didn't get it quite right. They had a ×1 and a ×16 on each axis, not a ×64. But that still gave them 20 arc-seconds precision with 16 bits of DAC and ADC resolution. The ×1 resolver gave the upper bits, which they called the coarse resolution, while the ×16 resolver gave the lower bits, which they called the fine resolution. However, there is one big exception. For reasons we won't get into, the optics in the command module had only their fine resolvers connected to the CDU, namely a ×16 and a ×64. So now, with the benefit of this elevator music explanation, you may be able to parse what Mike was just saying.
The command module unit interfaces with the optics, so it has the shaft and trunnion for star sightings. And that, we can talk more about this in more detail later, but the major difference there is that it only uses a 16-speed resolver instead of both 1-speed and 16-speed.
So what Mike was pointing out is that since he got a command module CDU instead of a LEM CDU, he is expecting that he will be missing 2 of the coarse channels, which is a slight bummer because we won't have the 100% exact hardware that was used to connect to the rendezvous radar and generated the 1202 errors. But who are we to complain? We are sure blessed to have gotten our hands on this hardware.
So on the command module, the 5 analog to digital channels are for the 3 IMU directions and the 2 optical axes.
Right.
And on the LEM, since they have a much simpler telescope, it's for also the 3 IMU and the 2 gimbals for the rendezvous radar.
Right.
And the rendezvous radar gimbal D2A is what failed and gave rise to the 1202.
Right.
But we think it has not been quite reported correctly.
Most things you read about those alarms online is
right. And that actually, you have calculated it actually, Mike, that they were much closer to disaster.
Oh yeah.
Than they actually reported or thought.
Yeah, absolutely.
And no, before we advance our theory, we want to check it.
Yep.
And now we'll be able to check it with this.
Yes.
When they say we're a go on that 1202, they probably weren't.
Yeah, there's It was a very gutsy call.
Right.
Way more gutsy than
right.
I thought.
It could have ended. Well, we think it could have ended badly, but we have to prove it first.
Right.
All right. So, sorry,
Yeah.
I cut you off. So,
part tag says that this is a command module unit. So we should have optics wiring and not rendezvous radar wiring, which, you know, we were aware of.
Yes.
But the IMU channels are wired almost identically to the rendezvous radar channels.
It's the same modules, just wired slightly differently.
Yeah.
So we could have
so we should, in theory, be able to use the IMU channels to replicate the problem just as well.
But then, when you got it,
yeah. So it's not really a command module CDU. It's also not really a lunar module CDU.
should we open it up?
Yeah, so let's open it up. So I can talk about more of like what it says it is.
So what did it say it is?
So you actually can't tell on the part tag anymore. You can show a picture from the auction where they show the part tag. But it claims to be serial number 21. And that the 21 is handwritten on what looks like whiteout. Or something like that.
So it has been renumbered.
Yeah, and also not written on the part tag, but written on the chassis. The part number for the CDU is 2007-222-111.
Oh, they wrote it.
Yeah, so you can see the 1, 1, and then the 1.
They added it, and then it fell out.
Yeah, and under the middle one, you can still see the remains of a 0 that they kind of erased.
Oh,
so it was 101 at some point, got revised up to 111.
Huh. And that number had been the 21, was it?
Yeah.
Was written over an original number, and you found out what?
ACSK dash. It was 21, but it's kind of rubbed off since then.
And what was underneath?
The original serial number is 15, which is also a command module CDU. Serial number 15 is what flew on Apollo 7, and this is very likely not flight hardware. So that was another piece of the mystery of like, what is this unit? Why was it serial number 15? Why does it still say serial number 15 under this whiteout? Why did the part number get changed? Why did the serial number get changed? What happened here?
And you figured it out.
Yeah. So I have a very good idea, I think, of what happened.
Okay. Do we need to open it up to find out?
Yes, yeah, we need to open it up to explain exactly what went on here. Because of the way the damper pushes things apart, I'm going to go around in a circle.
It just brings it up.
Yeah. So I'm taking these out in an order that I learned.
All right. The big moment's arrived. Is that a one-person thing, or?
Yeah, I got it.
Ooh.
You ready?
Okay, hold on. Go for it. Whoa. It's a beauty.
This is the damper plate that was pushing the trays apart.
It looks like an AGC kind of thing.
Yeah. Since Raytheon was building up the AGC digital logic modules, they actually made all of the modules in the CDU that have the same 2-input NOR gates were also made by Raytheon.
Okay. So and they look the same color as the AGC. So this is Raytheon, this is Raytheon, this is AC Delco.
Yes.
Oh, it says AC. All right, so top tray, you should see 3 cores, right? 1 cores, 2 cores, 3 cores, because that's for the IMU. And air and angle logic, they should be a fine and a coarse. Where's the fine?
Well, the fine is a mix between the main summing amplifier and quadrature rejection and the quadrant selector.
Okay, so it's in between those two. And then lower tray, there should be 2 coarse, right?
Yes. So opening up the CDU, thinking it was a command module CDU, and then seeing these two course system modules here. Command module CDUs do not have course system in them. So they're just not populated.
Oh, none at all. So how do you do the optical stuff?
One channel had a 16 times resolver, and the other had a 64 times resolver,
Oh,
and
so
they only used the fine system.
Only fine.
Yep.
So that's how you found out that, wait a second, this is command module, but the lower tray looks like it's from LEM.
At first I thought it was just bonus modules. Like somebody decided to populate them anyway. So I was like, okay, well, we have some spares.
And stroke of luck, right? Because this is the one that failed with the 1202. So this is exactly the one we wanted.
Yeah.
So what Mike expected to have gotten from the auction description and the part tag is this command module CDU, which has two empty modules right here in the lower tray. But instead, he got one that looks like this with the two course modules in it. And that's a LEM CDU lower tray, the one he actually was desperately looking for. But keep watching, because it gets better, and only Mike could have ever figured this out.
The other thing that caught my eye, because the first thing I was looking at was these course system modules that I wasn't expecting to be here. And they are part number 2007-236-031, and a -111 CDU should not have -031 core system modules. It should have -011 core system modules. All of the core system modules are -031 in this thing, even the ones in the upper tray. So,
oh, the course, yeah, it's 031 too.
Yeah.
So this has been monkeyed with.
It is not. It is not the -111 configuration that the top claims. Going through all the modules, they're all pretty much the most recent flight final versions of the modules instead of like the early development that I was expecting to find in a -111 box.
Eventually you figured out what happened, right? So
yeah.
You think the top actually was assigned to Apollo 7.
Yes. So, like I was saying earlier, the serial number 21 was written on what looks like whiteout or paint or something, and it's flaked off a little bit. So I took a look at it under the microscope, and the original serial number was 15, which is the version or the serial number that flew on Apollo 7. We have good records of that.
At some point it was rejected.
Yeah, at some point it was rejected. We should talk about the tray part numbers as well.
Okay.
Printed under the DA converter and under the power supply are the assembly numbers for the two trays. I can pull the modules if you want to look at that.
Please.
So if I pull the DA converter here, we'll find a -031 tray S. This is tray S, the upper tray, and this is tray X, the lower tray. So this is a -031 tray S, which is what you would expect to find for a sort of earlier model command module CDU. And the one that Apollo 7 flew with should have a -031 tray. So I could not believe that any piece of this was flown, just based off of like, why would they pull a flown tray and reuse it for some random combination of a lunar module CDU and a
and it probably would have not found its way to an auction.
Yeah. So I spent some time doing research. Pull the DA converter out. You look in there, you see assembly number 2007-091-031. So definitely command module wiring on the back plane.
Congratulations! you have an almost flown module on a very noble mission. So what happened?
Almost flown is the key. So I spent some time reading specifications for marking. We scanned everything that the National Archives has about the primary guidance system. So we have all the specs, all the everything. And each one of these yellow paint things has, you shall apply this for such and such reason at such and such location. And the tray S here has a 1/4-inch yellow dot right next to the part tag. And apparently that means that there's a waiver associated with the unit, and it is not flyable due to some sort of discrepancy. So what I think happened is that while the Apollo 7 CDU was part number -101, they had some sort of problem with it. I found a memo from mid-1967 saying discrepancy report, coupling data unit, command module, serial number 15. So I think what happened is that they found a discrepancy, they traced it down to the tray itself, replaced it with a different one. That one got revised up to -191, which is what flew. So this one, still has the -101 kind of printed on it. And then sometime later, somebody at AC Electronics wanted to build up a CDU, had this tray lying around. They either fixed the discrepancy or it didn't matter for whatever it was they were doing. So they grabbed this tray for building up their CDU. But the bottom tray that they took, if I pull the power supply, the bottom tray is part number -111. This is the final version of the lunar module CDU bottom tray. So exactly like would have been flown in on all of the lunar missions.
Apollo 11 in particular?
Yes, Apollo
and
11
the one that got the 1202 air in particular.
So combining all of the revisions, all the newer revisions of all these modules with the -111 tray number, that tells us that this CDU would be basically completely identical to the one that flew on Apollo 11. Apollo 11's was -261. This one would be either 221 or 251, depending on what type of bolts they use to affix it to the cold plate in these holes. So for our purposes, we can say it's -251. And the only difference between 251 and 261 is the processing specification they used to accept the dual NOR gates in these modules. So not all of these were accepted to the most strict spec, but other than the bolts and the spec used to accept the
yeah, so other than the
identical.
bolts, the electronics are similar.
Yeah.
Are the same, more than similar. They are the same as what was flown in Apollo 11.
Right.
LEM.
Of course, the fact that I have a lunar module tray on the bottom and a command module tray on top means that there's some weirdness with this unit in general. The CDU can do a little bit more than read angles from the IMU and the rendezvous radar or optics. It has some other functionality that's kind of vehicle dependent. So the command module CDU is actually the mechanism through which the Apollo guidance computer can take over steering of the Saturn rocket during launch. And that's done through the IMU channels, actually.
During the launch phase, the Saturn V was normally guided by the LVDC computer located in the instrument unit. But as a backup, the AGC could be made to steer the rocket by this little switch on the control panel that switches guidance from the IU to the AGC, called CMC in the command module. And I just learned from Mike that the interface for this was in the CDU.
The lunar module CDU, on the other hand, controls the cross pointers to tell you your velocity laterally when you're landing.
You can see the cross pointers in action while Mike is landing the LEM. He has them nice and centered, so it's going to be a good landing. As I just learned, the D2A controlling the cross pointers is also the CDU.
And because this unit has the wiring for one of those features on the top and the other feature on the bottom, that means neither of them work unless we try to change the wiring.
But that's not the one we're interested in.
Right, yeah. All of the regularly scheduled IMU and rendezvous radar stuff will work fine. So here's our power supply.
Very cool. And
here's the -111 tray number.
LEM confirmed. Very good. So you got a lot more than you bargained for.
Yeah.
What was it sold at on the R auction? They said evaluation unit or something.
They just said it was a command module CDU.
Okay.
Yeah, they didn't
say anything.
They didn't really say anything other than kind of what it did. The -111 on the the whole assembly and the serial number 21 that was handwritten on it, both actually match. If we look at the configuration drawings, they match what NASA calls, this drawing is the spacecraft installation list Apollo guidance equipment block 2. So post delivery of a guidance system to NASA, this drawing specifies all the versions of all the parts that go into that system. So if we look through the list, this is the row for the CDU, and there is one, or no, sorry, that's the PSA. Where's the CDU? It should be right around there. There we go. So 231, 231, 161, 281, but there's one here that is -111, apparently, allegedly hasn't been revised. And if we look at what this is, it says it's guidance system 207, which isn't associated with the spacecraft. It's the AC electronics house system. So
this is what this is then.
Probably, yeah, most likely. Another document that I have that I kind of hate, but is useful still, is the final report from AC Electronics that begins off with a list of all the thousands of memos that they wrote about the guidance hardware, and of which I've only been able to find in scan 10 or so. But here's one, ECDU serial number 21, system 207, history well utilized in the Apollo engineering lab. So both the dash number according to this drawing, if this says it's probably 207. The serial number 21 we see here matches the serial number that was handwritten. It seems like that's probably this unit. Why the system 207 command module that they had in their engineering lab would have a lunar module bottom half is a complete mystery to me. But I'm not at all complaining.
I think you lucked out, my friend.
Yeah.
Very good. Very well done.
And then this is the discrepancy report, CM CDU part number 2007-222, serial number 15.
So this is one that confirmed that this one had a fault somewhere.
Yeah.
Which we don't know what it is because we don't have the memo.
Yes.
Well, okay. Great. So things even out. I got a CT module, which is well that I can't open, but you got a mixture of an Apollo 7 Noble top module with the Apollo 11 bottom module that we wanted. So.
Yes, and this will do the job of recreating the alarm perfectly.
All right.
Well, this was a masterclass in Apollo hardware identification. Mike's command of the documentation he has amassed and scanned over many years never ceases to amaze. This was a lucky break, but it couldn't have happened to a better or more qualified person. We can't wait to pair it up and dig into the true nature of the 1202 errors, but that's a lot of work, which we'll leave for a future episode or two. See you then!